Okay, so this lecture is just about this issue here when we make IK handles and the joint chains behave in a strange way. Unpredictable angles where then the elbow or the knee, depends on what body part you're doing here, where the middle joint, so to speak, is bending into a unpredicted direction. So what I did here is 3 different joint chains. The ideal case on the top here, this is basically a joint chain that lies perfectly flat on the grid. Matter of fact, I used the grid to snap the joints on the plane. That means this triangle described by these joints is perfectly flat on that grid. The second joint chain, similar situation, perfectly snapped to the grid, so it's flat, but it is also a straight line. Means it doesn't actually describe a triangle whatsoever, it's just a line, and hence Maya doesn't know in which direction to bend the elbow. And then the most common case, since we are usually snapping joints to body parts that are being modeled, so they might not perfectly line up to any axis or grid plane. That's basically putting joints by eye, eyeballing it, right? So, and I did that here. So this is basically an almost straight arm, but you can see this not perfectly straight. So only the first joint I snapped to the grid, but the rest, the middle one and the end joint, I just eyeballed it in both axes. So, or 3 axes really. So this one is very, very close to the grid, but when you look closer, you see it's actually not. There's a tiny, tiny error here and a more visible error here on the very last one. Okay, so let's have a look what IK does to us when we apply that to certain chains. Here, IK handle. This one is doing exactly what we expect it to do. The pole vector here is already pointing flat straight to this plane, and when I move the IK handle, this is exactly where the elbow goes. It stays flat on the grid plane, just as we expected. Let me delete this one. So this is the ideal case and no error, no problems whatsoever. Now the next one probably gives us errors or gives us an unexpected result. And indeed, the elbow is flat, but it's pointing in the wrong direction. That is something we could fix with a pole vector constraint, having a control object. So not necessarily needed here to do something on the joints themselves. But again, you know, unexpected result, not necessarily what we want. So let me delete this one. Now here comes the worst case and probably most common case. Eyeballed joints. Now you can see already on the pole vector it's pointing somewhere, completely unpredicted. And then on top, while I'm moving this joint, or rather the IK handle, closer to the elbow, to the shoulder, it even starts to spin. And this has to do with this control basically overtaking this point here, its original rest position. And then basically the plane that is being described as this triangle here between these 3 joints is changing orientation. Okay? So not what we want. And that's probably what most of you guys experience now. So let me undo this, get it back into rest position, delete this IK handle, and I leave that joint chain alone. and then make a duplicate of this, which is the one that I'm going to fix. So let me snap this down here a bit away from the rest, so it's a bit more clear. Okay, first things first, let's select all. Oops. Let's select all of them and select the hierarchy and make the local rotation axis visible. So local rotation axis is correct by default if you draw the joint chain in a specific way. In this case, I snapped it to the grid, these ones, hence the local rotation axis will be fine already to begin with. If you don't do that, but be more eyeballing, you might end up with something like this. So we made that duplicate here of that joint chain. Let's fix that. I select this guy, select the hierarchy, go in my orient constraint toolkit, and I make the y-axis point upwards to y direction in world space. Okay, so that's basically the same as what we have here on these joint chains. That applies, of course, only to parents, so joints that have a child. The last one, the end joint, never orients by this method, but you can always use the orient joint to work just on the end one, and then it will orient itself to its parent. Okay, so with that done, let me make a duplicate again. Put that down here. So let's have a look if this already fixed something. I make a new IK handle, and as you can see, the direction is still pointing in this way, and indeed it still moves in that way first, and then when this handle overtakes the position of the rest position of the elbow, it even flips. Okay, so that was not a fix, but still necessary for other reasons. So the trick here is to tell Maya what our preferred angle is, where we actually want the elbow to go. Okay, for this we just basically select the joints, and remember, all joints have rotation values of 0. If they don't, something went wrong. Then you should do a freeze transform. Freeze transforms, by the way, on joints always just change the rotation values, not actually translate values, because that would not make sense at all. Okay, so what we do is we basically just rotate the joint chain into our preferred position. Okay, so basically we're describing now, this is what we want. Okay, then we select both of these joints, or select hierarchy, right click the joints, and then choose set preferred angle. That's it. Now we can rotate them back. So again, select hierarchy and then set the values, the rotation values, to 0, which basically puts our joints back to its original rest position, so they have the same pose as before. And if we create an IK handle now, after we set the preferred angle, now you can see here it's already perfectly flat, it's pointing in the right direction too. And on top, this flipping might happen still because this joint here on that handle is slightly offset. So it still calculates the triangle, and eventually this triangle, you know, sits a bit angled in space, as you can see here. And of course then it has to flip. It's just the nature of this triangle. But you have to go very far to get this effect. As you can see, it's still pretty flat here. So that is basically the solution. So if you have encountered that problem, you have to basically get your joints into rest position, remove the IK handle, rotate the joints to your preferred angle, select all these joints, right click, and then set preferred angle. Set preferred angle. Okay? Set them back to 0. And if you select hierarchy, you only have to type it once. And then you create the IK handle. The rotate plane solver IK handle. Okay? And that fixes it. Okay, that's it.